Welcome everyone to Rules Explained. In this episode, we're going over Warhammer 40,000 Rogue Trader. We're on the chapter of mutants. So, mutants are. Rob, why don't you explain what they are?
Well, in essence, and again, this is going to sound very familiar to anyone who has done any sort of gaming outside of the Warhammer Rogue Trader rules. Mutants are a very common theme in gaming all over the place. We have Mutant Year Zero as one of the more recent versions of a mutant role-playing game, but if you want to go all the way back to its origins in Metamorphosis Alpha and Gamma World games in which you would randomly determine your mutant's abilities and your mutant's powers and your mutant's defects, and you would end up with these crazy wonky combinations that were sometimes very game destabilizing. I mean, Death Field Generation, for example, is a very interesting mutation from the Gamma World game, and it had serious game implications if you ended up having a player character you have that mutation. But suffice to say, the Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader game does indeed go ahead and use this similar concept where there is a whole bunch of random mutations. Some of them are drawbacks and can be debilitative to your model. Others are very fantastically, useful in a game. Others are just there for aesthetic purposes. So the mutant rules, I believe, in my opinion, are there not for use in an actual game setting, because as we will discuss, later on, there's no point values associated with mutations. But I think they're there to again round out this game as that hybrid role-playing game.
So it's more for aesthetics, you think?
Yes, but also again for the role-playing aspect, because it would be interesting. And I'm gonna drop another name here and see who recognizes the role-playing game called Paranoia. Paranoia was a
Oh my God, I
game.
still have that rule book, by the way.
Isn't it awesome? It's just a fun concept for all those people who thought 1984 and THX 1138 would be great if you combined them and mashed them up. But the essence of Paranoia is that if you have a mutation, amongst other things, you were in danger of being executed and terminated. Suffice to say, there's suggestions about that too. I mean, if you live in the Imperium of man, mutations are seen as a taint of chaos. So, in a role-playing sense, you would use mutations as either A, we got to go find these mutants and destroy them so we can preserve humanity, or B, if you happen to be playing the mutants, we have to run away from the agents of the Inquisition and the Marines and so on and so forth, while we try to save our skins and convince everybody that we deserve to survive and we're not all agents of Khorne or Slaanesh or whatever.
All right, so how do I go about creating a mutant?
Very simple. You just declare that model, that character is going to be a mutant, and then you roll a d3 for the number of mutations, and then you roll a d100 for the actual mutations themselves.
They have
Yep,
a
there's the
lot
d100.
of mutations.
Yes.
We will not be going into every single mutation that they have.
No.
But they do have some interesting ones. Silly Walk.
Yes, and I do believe that was purposely put in there because A, these people are from Britain, and B, this was a time period when the reruns of the very, very interesting show were very popular, and everybody was at least on some level connected to that great circus that was flying and went by the first name of Monty.
Wasn't there a python in there somewhere?
Yes, I do believe there's some sort of snake reference as well. Yes.
See, now these mutations don't cost any points, and now I'm looking at it not from a role-playing perspective, but from a battlefield perspective.
Right.
I mean, a lot of these have effects that are actually a pretty big deal within the game, like Ironheart Skin, which I believe
Yes.
actually gives you a save.
Yes, and if you really look at the point values, which we will be doing either in this episode or the next one, depending on how much we really want to go ahead and go into detail today. But there are some ways you can extrapolate point values for some mutations. You could always say that acid spit is like some sort of flamer. You could say that, there is rules for calculating point values for certain armor saves, which, like you said, the iron skin. And you could always go ahead and say, well, if my movement value goes up, I have to go ahead and pay the point cost for that. So I suppose if you really wanted to nitpick, you could find the point costs, but there are no official point costs for any of these. You are absolutely correct.
So speaking of point costs, we now move into calculating points. If you are an Excel lunatic, you will love the point value system in this game.
Yeah, it did involve quite a bit of math. And again, the fractions, this version of Warhammer, in fact, this is probably the only game I can think of off the top of my head that was so obsessive with retaining fractions. I mean, quarter points, half points, three-quarter points. It was always fun going ahead and saying, well, how much is your army worth? Well, it's worth 401.25 points. It was always interesting having to carry all those fractions.
I mean, so how would you do a battle? Would you say, you've got 100 points, go spend them, or 200 points, or
Yep, exactly.
because I
There
know,
the there's a
the average battles generally, I mean, what it's supposed to be is anywhere between 1200 and like 2000 is supposed to be a good sized battle.
This system was designed to go ahead and provide a way for players mostly and GMs to go ahead and create some sort of balance to their games. In fact, it's right there on page 60. It does say point values have been included as an alternative to experience and intelligent consideration on the part of the GM. All right, it's almost like an insult if you have to use the points in their mind. They're trying to suggest that people should use other items, such as, hey, do I want to have 10 Marines versus one Imperial Guard? No, that doesn't make any sense. But I guess if you really wanted to calculate the points, we could find out why that would not be a good idea.
So for the point system, we have point value modifiers. So how do I calculate points?
Well,
So
should
I
we go
think
the
we might go
short
to,
form or the long form?
actually, I think we might go back to the first slide.
Yeah,
So,
because that's where we have to start.
yeah, so we start here.
You have a basic profile, and the basic profile is worth 5 points. And then for everything that you adjust on that basic profile, you have to pay points for. As you can see, if you increase, for example, your strength, it costs 1 for 1. If you decide to increase your ballistic skill, it's 1/4 point for 1, and so on and so forth. So you get to adjust all of your different scores based upon what you want to customize. After you do that, you end up having your final point value, which is an example they give, 7.5 for this particular example. For anything that costs 10 points or less, you're done. But once you go ahead and start getting things that are higher point cost, the designers of the game realized that there was a exponential rise in ability, but a linear rise in points. So then they put in these multipliers. So if your score is 11 to 15, then you got to multiply your actual final product by 1.5, and so on and so forth, to make the point values commensurate with the actual strength and or power of the model you just created.
Okay. So that's the base cost.
Yes.
All right. So now we take into account the modifiers.
Those modifiers are the ones that we were just mentioning would be applied after you've
Okay.
done your base cost. Yes.
Okay. So I have my base cost. I adjust it for stats. There is a point value modifier. So I see they go from 11 to 15, 16 to 20, and then all the way
Right.
up to 100.
Mm-hmm.
What does this get applied to? I mean, if are these stats or are these?
Yes. This again is the realization when they saw that the power went up exponentially rather than geometrically, so they or linearly, I should say. And as a result, they needed to go ahead and increase the point values using the multiplier. So you would apply this after you finished, modifying your basic profile.
Oh, so I modify the profile, and
Mhm.
then he's worth, well, all, I guess it would only take effect if the point value of the base cost was above 11, was 11
Right,
or more.
right.
Okay, then now you have a modifier. So let's say I had a Space Marine, I don't know,
Okay.
and let's say he had a base value of 17. So he would have a modifier of 2.
That would make his actual cost 34.
Okay, so you multiply it then by the base.
Yes.
So is this before or after you add an equipment?
Now, this is where the crux comes in. According to the sequence, it's before you buy the weapons. So weapons would now just add to that base value. There was some discussion in my group that you should probably do all the calculations and then do the multiplier, which would result in very inflated point values, but it would make sense because if I have a ballistic skill of 3, or if I have a ballistic skill of 6, wouldn't that make my bolter or my flamer more effective because of that? And shouldn't that point cost for that weapon go up as a result? A lot of debates back and forth. There's arguments on both sides. But according to the way the rules would be interpreted, you take the basic profile, you modify it if necessary, and then you add additional weapons, equipment, and so on and so forth.
Yeah, I mean, in principle, it's not that much different than how it's done today. It's just they've done the base calculations for you. So
Yes,
you have the base calculation for your model, and then you add in the war gear that that model has. You add it up, and you've got your point cost for the units. This is just taking it more granular, and I mean, God, that this is something I think Games Workshop has really struggled with over years, and that they've
yes,
really tried to balance out. The problem they have today is they have a lot of armies and yeah, a lot of points. I mean, even in one version of Age of Sigmar, they did away with points and just said, "Here's the models." They had some pushback, and they came out with the A General's Handbook, which then had points in it. Um, in fact, in Age of Sigmar, what they did was they said, "Here's the unit, here's the points, done."
yeah. Point values have a long and glorious history for wargaming, where people would try to go ahead and balance out forces for non-historical games, so that way they could go ahead and recreate any type of scenario. So if you were playing, if you just wanted to go ahead and play some Confederates versus some Union soldiers, for example, they would have point values for these armies, so that way you could play out a fictional battle within the actual American Civil War. And the idea of how much something costs is very tangible and very, shall I say, quantitative when you talk about actual historical stuff, because you could argue, ballistics, you could argue effectiveness based on actual battle reports and so on and so forth. But when you get into these science fiction and fantasy games, like you just said, how do you go ahead and measure the effectiveness of these weapons when they don't exist? And the only way to do that is to constantly play them and to play them in a wide variety of different
Oh yes,
situations.
oh yeah. Uh, One game that did a really good job um, using point values and having a nice balanced game is X-Wing from Fantasy Flights.
Yes, I would agree.
Every game I've played with that, it usually comes down to one ship. So it's very well balanced so far.
Yes.
Haven't played second edition yet or their next version of the game. But if it's anything like the first one, yeah, they've done a really good job. They've they, they've done a really good job balancing out the game with the point value system that they have.
Yes.
So that moves us on to equipment. So
And
I have
by the way,
my
if you go back real quick to weapons there, I want to go ahead and point out another thing that I just absolutely adore about this game system is if you take a look, and this is the first time we've had a chance to show and talk to the audience more specifically about why this game is so interesting. Because look at some of your loadouts that you can potentially do for your models. I can go ahead and have an antique pistol, which is essentially a flintlock pistol. Okay. I could go ahead and have an auto pistol, which is again just like your regular pistols. There are so many options here for me and my scenarios that I could play out. If I wanted to play a pure fantasy game, I could using the Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader rulebook, or I could play a pirate game. I have limitless possibilities with this one rulebook. It is an absolute joy in that regards. But anyway, we can move on.
That is true. And then we have equipment. So you get your base model, apply the multiplier, you choose your weapons. So I mean, this is essentially your war gear that you're adding in.
Yes.
So I mean, in principle, it's not that much different than the way they're doing it in 8th and 9th edition. You've got the cost for the base model. It's just they've done the calculations for you, and they're saying just add in the war gear how you want it laid out. So here's the equipment that they have. Flight pack. I don't remember. Didn't original Space Marines did they have the jump pack?
Yes, and that was always an interesting little exercise in interpreting rules. Yeah, every Space Marine had a jump pack, and it was very fun to play these games because they were just all over the table, and usually ended up having some of them scatter, which was always fun too. Especially if one scattered off the table, then they were considered dead.
You got to keep the
Um,
2 inches.
exactly. So that was a lot of fun, and that gets back to when Warhammer 40K was emulating some of those popular science fiction that was out about a decade or so earlier, which was, of course, Starship Troopers with its powered infantry, the mobile infantry, I should say, and its ability to jump and leapfrog using these jet assisted armored suits to go ahead and keep their maneuverability. And I've always thought that was incredibly great. And we improvised rules by saying, okay, what if you did not have the jump pack? Would you have heavier armor? So we came up with rules for Space Marines that were just heavier armor and didn't have a jetpack and sacrificed their jump mobility for better protection. And it worked out really, really well. And I'm quite sad to see it go. You still see them all the models there. They always have these every Space Marine model, and even in the animated films on YouTube, they all have those jetpacks. There's nozzles on them. You can see where they're supposed to have it, but they're not jetpacks anymore. They're just packs.
Well, they're engines now. That's basically the engine for the Space Marine armor.
But what are
That's
all the
the
nozzles
motor
for?
behind it.
But what are the nozzles for?
They're just aesthetics. That they're there to adjust the engine.
Okay,
But it's basically the power pack that provides power to the suit.
right, and I completely understand. I
Yeah,
completely see the logic in that. But originally, it was indeed a jump
a
pack.
jump pack. All right, and we had
Mhm.
Space Marines running around without the backpacks on. So, dreadnoughts and vehicles. Is this done the exact same way?
Yes, there's some added nuances based upon the idea that you have to adjust for their speed, and of course even you have to pay for their acceleration and deceleration rates. So there's a lot of additional crunching going on here, and they've put in some just arbitrary, well, arbitrary might be a strong word, but some quick adds just because they know certain vehicles have certain advantages. Like for example, the Dreadnought, you immediately start with just 25 points before you even begin.
Well, it says plus 25 points. Is there a
Right.
base cost and then you add 25 points, or does it just begin at 25 points?
You start with the 25 points after the basic profile. Beg your pardon. After the basic profile.
Okay, so you do the basic profile, which is a base cost of 5. You adjust for stats, apply the multiplier, add 25, and then it says to adjust for land speed.
Hmm. So if you have it go faster, which by the way, or slower, I suppose you could make a slower one and get
No,
points
no,
per turn.
no, no. You know what? I messed up because I was thinking of it like a non-vehicle unit. So you have the
Oh,
stats for it because here it lists, the maximum land speed. the acceleration, deacceleration rate, which you have to then apply. So I think you're right. I think it starts with 25 points. You adjust it
Right.
for stats. Um, Capacity times 2, toughness times 3, damage
Yeah.
times
So
5.
so those are your profiles. Those are the attributes, if you wish, for a vehicle, and you just go ahead and whatever it says from the basic profile, which is found in the equipment section in the rulebook. For example, right now I'm looking at a typical bike.
Oh, I get it. I get it.
Right.
I get it.
Okay.
So then I take the capacity. Let's say the capacity is 3. I take 3 times 2. That's 6. That costs me 6 points.
Right.
Okay, I get it. I get it. And then the save, it's 10 per pip. Oh, I
Yep.
see. So 10 per pip. It says i.e. 5 or 6 equals 20.
Right. A pip is the old-fashioned way of describing a number on a six-sided die. So the number six actually had six little pips on it, I guess. So
Okay.
the whole description of a number used to be called a pip. So if you had to save a six, that would be 10 points. If you had to save a five or six, that would be a cost of 20.
Oh, okay. And then if you had a 4, 5, or 6, it would be 30.
Yes.
Okay, I gotcha. That makes sense. Now we have robots. We have the one sentence for robots.
Yeah.
Based upon their individual profile and any weaponry as if they were normal living creatures. So you basically add them up like they were a living creature.
Yeah, because robots, their statistics and attributes are very similar to a living creature. It's just their game functions, and of course, we already discussed, the whole bang concept. Your robots can blow up and move randomly with damage. But anyway, make a long story short, besides those special rules, they pretty much look like and operate like a normal model.
That brings us into psionics or psychic powers.
Or magic.
Magic. So the points for psychic creatures are worked out the same way as any other troops and then modified by psychic mastery, psi level, and the number of abilities they have. So if I'm a level 1 a psyker, each level of psychic mastery is 10 points. So I'm a level 1, that costs me 10 points. And then for each ability, it costs me 5 points.
Yes. So
So I have to
here's how.
specify which powers I have before I go into battle.
Right. So if I was a level one psychic mastery character with 10 psi level points with one level one ability, it would cost me 10 to be the psychic master level. It would cost me another 10, 1 point for each psi level point, and another 5 for that one ability for a total cost of 25 points for that psychic.
Okay. And that's so like, okay, I get it. Wow, that really can add up quickly.
Yes. And again, as we've discovered, some of those powers would make sense. And when you get up to the level four abilities, there's some quite interesting time warping
Yeah,
abilities and so on and so forth.
no kidding. They got some crazy stuff. Now, using point values, and of course, all of this can be adjusted by the GM.
Right.
So I think that's all this part of the rulebook is saying is, yeah, this is all nice, but the GM can come in and override anything.
And this is where the GM has to make some decisions because the argument always starts with, hey, I've got 100 points of Space Marines, you have 100 points of Orcs, we should have a very even battle. Oh, but wait a minute, the Orcs are behind trenches that are, with 3 foot thick Durasteel walls, which have a base save of 2 through 6.
Which is a
Okay,
very
well,
interesting point because in the modern, well, I don't say the modern, but in 9th edition Warhammer, terrain actually has point values. So you could say
yes,
your army has this terrain, which then costs you X amount of points.
and that was never really a consideration in the game, which is why that caveat is there, saying, hey, the point values are not the end of the conversation. You have to always make sure that you're looking at all the other factors in the scenario that you're developing before you go ahead and just make it so.
So the last thing on the point values is we have the basic points for common creatures. So is this just a quick way, or no, these are the base values or the base points used, it looks like. So like if you have a human, your basic human that's starts off as 5. If he's a champion, does he have a base value of 7?
Yes.
Okay.
So this is just a way to go ahead and use the pre-generated stats, the stat blocks that are found later in the rulebook for each one of those races and for each level of competency. Not doesn't include equipment or weapons or anything. It's just their stats. So that way you don't have to calculate everything on a repeated basis. Same thing for the monsters, quote unquote, that are down below. They have already been pre-calculated for you. Well, again, no weapons or no other non-natural armor or non-natural weapons. So that way you can pretty much get into the game as quickly as possible without having to calculate everything.
That is really cool. So that takes us to the rules. That is the core rules of Warhammer 40K Rogue Trader. In our next episode, we are just kind of going through the rest of the rule book. We're going to talk about the history. We're going to look through the equipment, anything that kind of stands out. We're going to talk about. It's going to be a very relaxed episode. Again, if you want to find us, we're on Facebook, facebook.com/rules explained. You can find us on iTunes, Spotify, YouTube. If you have any questions or comments, please email us at rulesexplained@gmail.com. As always, we'd like to thank Peebles for the music. He did a fantastic job. It was all done from scratch. So I am John Merritt.
I'm Rob Nothing.
Guys, thank you for listening.
Adios.